Hurricane Maria, the third major hurricane to develop in the past several weeks and the second to rage through the Caribbean this month, hit the U.S. territory of Puerto Rico Wednesday morning with 155-mile-per-hour winds, 2 miles per hour short of Category 5 status, making it the third strongest storm to make landfall in the United States. It carried sustained winds of up to 115 miles per hour, destroying buildings and knocking out power to the entire island. Maria has killed at least 17 people and has devastated several small islands, including St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands and Dominica. Now a Category 3 storm, it is on track to hit the Turks and Caicos Islands and the southeastern Bahamas on Thursday night and Friday, according to the U.S. National Hurricane Center. The Turks and Caicos have already been devastated by Hurricane Irma. Not surprisingly and regrettably, the Trump administration is denying all connection between these extreme weather events and climate change, despite the overwhelming expert evidence to the contrary. Instead of ramping down fossil fuel production, the Trump administration appears hell-bent on ramping it up. One way in which it appears set to do that is by opening up the Arctic Wildlife National Refuge to oil drilling. With us to discuss this issue is Subhankar Banerjee, a renowned Arctic photographer and longtime writer and artist on environmental issues. He is the author of Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, Seasons of Life and Land, and the editor of Arctic Voices, Resistance at the Tipping Point. He has published other books and numerous essays on the Arctic, and his current exhibition, Long Environmentalism in the Near North, is on display at the University of New Mexico Art Museum through February 2018. Thanks and welcome back to The Real News, Subhankar.
Good to be talking with you, Dimitri.
Now, Subhankar, President Trump said today that Hurricane Maria had obliterated Puerto Rico, certainly an apt and fair description of the devastation the island has experienced. And he even asserted that we've never seen winds like those of Maria, yet he continues to deny that climate change is a factor in these apocalyptic, really what can fairly be described as apocalyptic storms. After Harvey and Irma, he said on Air Force One, quote, "We've seen bigger storms," close quote. How do you respond to this rationalization of what's happening from the Trump administration?
You know, all these extreme events that you just mentioned, and while Harvey was going on, there was extreme floods across South Asia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, that killed more than 1,500 people and affected more than 40 million people. So what we are seeing, what George Monbiot recently called, don't say climate change anymore, it's climate breakdown. Probably we are beginning to see the climate breakdown. And this is happening with less than 1 degree increase, little over 0.8, since the pre-industrial time. So imagine what could happen with 2 degree increase. And a couple of years ago, a major study was published in the prestigious journal Nature that unequivocally said that if we are to keep the global temperature rise under 2 degrees from pre-industrial, all Arctic resources must remain underground. So any development of Arctic resources, oil, gas, coal, and methane hydrates would be extremely dangerous. It's not just simply reckless or irresponsible, it's extremely dangerous. But the Trump administration, parts of the Republican-controlled Congress, the state of Alaska legislature are all moving forward purely to basically fill the pockets of their allies in the fossil fuel industry, the industry that is wrecking the whole planet now.
So I'd like you to just give us, Subhankar, a brief overview of the history of the Department of Interior's attempts to open up the Arctic Refuge to drilling, and then talk to us, please, about what the Trump administration is doing today to advance that initiative, and why is the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge so important?
So let me just begin with what the Trump administration right now doing. Secretary of Interior Ryan Zinke said that he's a geologist, he loves science, and referring to what he wants to do is start seismic exploration in the coastal plain of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, that it would help him immensely to understand what's deep beneath the underground in that place. What I would like to tell the Secretary is that, Secretary, please sit down with me and try to understand what we already know, what's on the surface of that place, before you try to figure out what is deep underground. And what is on the surface of the coastal plain of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, it is an internationally significant biological reserve, the largest conservation area in the entire circumpolar north. Scientists call the coastal plain where drilling is proposed as the biological heart of the refuge, and the Gwich'in indigenous people of Arctic North America call the coastal plain where drilling is proposed Itzigwatsan Gwandai Gudlit, which means sacred place where life begins. Now, Congress is trying to open this up, primarily the Republican administrations, for the last 30 plus years. And the Department of Interior has now consistently established a rather shady reputation. Rather than being stewards of public lands, it's really they are the stewards of fossil fuel industry. So in the 1980s, the Reagan administration first made an attempt to open up the area. At that time, federal biologists were sent gag orders. They could not even speak to the media, to the public, about the biological significance of the refuge. At that time, the Reagan administration approved seismic exploration with a limited time window of 84 through 86. So seismic exploration was done at that time. But subsequent to that, there was also a major baseline study done on biological and cultural significance. Very important body of work. Fast forward to George W. Bush administration, where I started working on this for the past 17 years. And the Secretary of Interior of the Bush administration, the first one, Secretary of Interior Gail Norton, lied to Congress. US Congress, the Senate actually asked the Secretary to come up with a report about the significance of the Porcupine River caribou herd that calves on the coastal plain. The chief biologist of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge prepared the report, sent it to the Secretary, but the report that the Secretary then sent to Congress was completely replacing the original biologist report with a report prepared by an oil company or consultant. And in it, she said...
Subhankar, if I may, what was the lie? Was it that the Secretary represented to Congress that this was the report that had been generated by the experts within the Department of the Interior? In what respect did the Secretary mislead Congress?
So the Secretary's report, she said that 11 out of last 18 years, the porcupine caribou herd core calving area has been outside the coastal plain of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Whereas in reality, the biologist report said that 27 out of the past 30 years, the core calving area of the porcupine caribou herd has been inside the refuge. So that was just one part of the big lie to mislead Congress. There were other parts that the Secretary used because she entirely replaced. And the way we found out about that was Washington Post published a front page investigative article on this. And then finally, Secretary of Interior Gail Norton had to apologize for that. And now comes Secretary of Interior hired Zinke, who is trying to open it up through another backdoor policy, which is this seismic testing. It's entirely a backdoor policy, a maneuver that they're trying right now. And as I said, it is a incredibly biologically significant place, and I can go tell you at least a couple of things. The Porcupine River caribou herd is right now roughly close to 200,000 strong. It's one of the largest caribou herd in the entire North American Arctic, and the Gwich'in people depend on it culturally, nutritionally, and spiritually. So it's a human rights issue for them. And you can look at the website of the Gwich'in Steering Committee, their Facebook page, and they are gearing up for the fight. I work very closely with them. Also, what the media always misleads, that all of the Inupiat from Kaktovik are in favor of drilling in the Arctic Refuge. This is a complete lie that the media and the politicians perpetuate. Actually, significant number of the Inupiat people from Kaktovik, especially a lot of the young people, are actually opposed to drilling in the Arctic Refuge. And I work with them very, very closely. So Arctic National Wildlife Refuge coastal plain is a internationally significant biological area. Also, one of the most important things that's going on right now with climate change, it's affecting the polar bear population, as you know, very rapidly because of the shrinking sea ice habitat. So they are increasingly becoming more and more dependent on denning onshore, meaning in the coastal plain of the Arctic Refuge. And as it happens, the coastal plain, because of its narrow width between the coast and the mountain, harbors the largest concentration of onshore denning habitat for polar bears. And I have taken photographs of polar bear dens on the coastal plain, polar bear with cubs on the coastal plain. Some of the areas that I had camped and photographed have already been taken up by the sea because of sea level rise and coastal erosion. So very significant impact of climate change. And the polar bear population of the southern Beaufort Sea has declined by 40% between 2001 and 2010, a very serious mass die-off event taking place out there. So why would we, and there are enormous number of birds from all over the world, 6 continents and all 50 US states go up there for nesting. It's an incredibly important biological place, internationally important, and it's a very important place for human rights issues for the Gwich'in Nation. So it would be both a violation of biological rights as well as a violation of human rights.
So lastly, Subhankar, could you talk to us briefly about the effects of seismic testing on the wildlife that we see in the National Wildlife Refuge? What impact is this?
So the seismic testing takes place in the winter time. That's the time you can only do seismic testing. So during the winter time is when these polar bears are in their den. So seismic testing, without a doubt, would directly impact the polar bears denning there during the winter months. So that's one thing. Second thing is that as climate is warming and Arctic is warming at a much faster pace than the rest of the planet, the permafrost onshore is actually melting. I have a photograph of exposed coffin where the ground melted away, exposing coffin of a whaler from the 19th century, believe it or not, what we call the first Arctic oil rush, exposing that coffin. So seismic testing, what it would do is it's incredibly heavy vehicle would actually impact the already kind of softening and melting permafrost on the tundra, very, very fragile to begin with. So these are immediate impacts seismic testing would have. Those marks that seismic vehicles leave behind, very, very heavy vehicle, will be there for 50+ years. But more importantly, why would we allow this drilling in a place that is so significant biologically and culturally? Just imagine this.
And of course, the seismic testing is precisely for that purpose. Ultimately, there's no point in doing seismic testing if the ultimate objective is not to open it up to fossil fuels development.
So let me maybe address that, what they're trying to do. So the Trump administration is trying all-out effort. So seismic testing is something that the administration can potentially approve without going to Congress, just by changing some rules and basically extending the original one that only allowed until 1986. But more importantly, Congress has to vote on it. Only Congress can decide whether drilling can proceed there or not. So this is more of creating a buzz that, hey, we are going up there, we are going to open it up and blah, blah, blah. But it's not going to do much because Congress has to approve. So the American public all across the country can call their members of Congress, both the House and the Senate, and then urge them to actually defeat these. So that process is actually what is called the budget reconciliation process. So President Trump in late May sent his budget request to Congress, in which he included a request to open up the Arctic Refuge through drilling. Then the House picked it up, and in late July, the House Budget Committee, not the entire House, House Budget Committee included a provision about $5 billion that we believe includes language about drilling in the Arctic Refuge, although it's not been made public yet. Then the next thing that happens is the House and the Senate will actually do what is called the budget resolution. Once the resolution moves through, then they go through a process called budget reconciliation, where basically the relevant committees on the House side, which is the House Natural Resources Committee, and on the Senate is the Energy Committee, they'll pick it up. And potentially, because it's a Republican-controlled Congress, potentially they'll try to push for it. But of course, they have tried this process multiple times in the past. It has been defeated again and again. One time, there was a veto by President Bill Clinton. And in 2005, we fought very, very hard. I was very involved. Actually, moderate Republicans defeated the House, the budget reconciliation bill. So we are hopeful that this will be defeated, but the American public have to get involved, understanding the process, understanding the human rights implication for the Gwich'in and the biological significance and the significance for global warming. We should not be drilling in the Arctic right now at all if we are to keep Irma and Hurricane Harvey and Maria and all of these things from getting totally out of control and becoming a complete climate breakdown.
Well, as we've seen all too painfully, moderate Republicans are an endangered species. So I think it's fair to say that the public can't take anything for granted anymore in terms of the refuge.
So that's why the public have to get involved. The public really needs to get involved. We are, of course, gearing up. The environmental community, the Gwich'in Nation, we are all gearing up, but the public have to get involved.
Well, this has been Dimitri Lascaris speaking to Subhankar Banerjee about the Trump administration's latest efforts to open up the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge to fossil fuels exploration and development. Thank you very much for joining us today, Subhankar.
Thank you, Dimitri.
And this is Dimitri Lascaris for The Real News.